They released millions of rabbits into the desert and something drastically happened, I guess.
If a deadly desert is destroying your country, releasing millions of small animals sounds like total madness. Yet, that is exactly what happened here. For years, China was dealing with an environmental nightmare as the Gobi Desert inched closer to valuable farmland day by day, slowly swallowing everything in its path. So, they launched a bizarre plan. They released millions of rabbits into the dry sand and hoped that nature would begin to repair itself. At first, the results looked incredible. Green patches started appearing again, and the team celebrated a scientific miracle. But the celebration ended too soon, because deep inside the desert, something dangerous had already started happening. Something that would eventually turn this perfect environmental victory into a massive crisis. Let's dive in. China's desert crisis. For many years, China was fighting a battle most people never even noticed. Not a war with another country, but a war against the land itself. Because across northern China, deserts were slowly expanding year after year. The moving sand was covering roads, swallowing farms, burying rivers, and even entire villages, until in some areas, people simply had to leave the land their families had lived on for generations, because nothing could grow there anymore. One of the worst-hit regions was the Gobi Desert in Inner Mongolia, spanning over 7,200 square miles. It kept growing, pushing sand into nearby regions, and sometimes it didn't even stop at rural areas. Strong winds carried dust all the way into major cities like Beijing. In the worst storms, the sky would turn orange. Buildings across the street would disappear behind a wall of dust. And after those storms passed, hospitals filled up with people struggling to breathe. But here's what made the situation even more alarming. This wasn't just a local problem anymore. Scientists began warning that desertification was becoming a national threat. By the early 2000s, around 27% of China's land was already affected, and every year it kept spreading further into fertile farming regions. And the harshest impact was on rural families who had nothing else to depend on except the land itself. So China tried everything it could think of. Massive tree-planting walls were built across northern regions. Engineers constructed barriers to stop moving sand. Irrigation systems were installed to bring life back into dry soil. But the desert didn't give up easily. Strong winds destroyed young plants. Some trees died before they could even take root. And in many areas, the land stayed too dry to support life at all. Billions of yuan were spent trying to slow the desert's advance. But the sand kept moving forward anyway. And that's when something unexpected happened. A businessman named Wang Wenbiao decided to approach the problem differently. In 1988, as chairman of Elion Resources Group, he looked at the Gobi Desert differently from everyone else. Where others saw a hopeless wasteland, he saw a system that could still be repaired. And his belief was simple. Maybe the solution wasn't fighting nature, but working with it. So he began launching large-scale environmental projects directly inside the desert. Over the next 30 years, his company planted more than 300 million willow trees across dry regions, built roads through empty land, restored damaged soil, and slowly created green zones where nothing had grown for decades. Even massive solar installations were built, including structures shaped like a giant horse in the desert. Eventually, the United Nations recognized the Gobi model as a global example of desert restoration. But despite all this progress, Wang knew something was still missing, because trees alone weren't enough to fully stabilize the desert. The soil was still weak, sand still moved between restored areas, and plants still struggled to spread naturally. So researchers began searching for something else, something that could work alongside the trees, not replace them. And that search led them toward a surprisingly small solution: an animal that could multiply faster than almost anything else in the desert. The rabbit experiment? By the late 2000s, environmental teams working inside the Gobi Desert understood one serious problem. Trees alone could not fully repair the damaged land. Workers planted millions of willows across dry regions, but large spaces between green zones remained unstable. Strong winds still pushed loose sand across open ground. Many young plants struggled because the soil stayed weak and dry beneath the surface. Scientists started searching for another method that could help nature rebuild itself faster. Researchers from the Chinese Academy of Forestry and environmental experts connected to Elion Resources Group began studying how small desert animals changed soil conditions in wild ecosystems. They noticed that some animals naturally loosen hard ground while spreading seeds through their movement and waste. Over time, these activities sometimes helped plants return to damaged areas. That observation led researchers toward rabbits. At first, the idea sounded strange. Many officials doubted the plan immediately. Rabbits reproduced quickly, moved across huge distances, and survived in harsh environments. Some experts feared the animals could become difficult to control. But supporters inside the project argued that rabbits might help stabilize the recovering ecosystem if teams monitored them carefully. The proposal slowly gained attention. Scientists explained that rabbits could improve the land in several ways. Their digging could break hard soil and allow rainwater to sink deeper underground. Their waste could add nutrients to dry areas where plants struggled to grow. Their movement could spread seeds naturally across empty spaces between restored zones. Most importantly, rabbits adapted extremely well to difficult climates. Environmental planners believed the animals could help connect isolated green regions into one larger living system. In 2012, local authorities in Inner Mongolia approved limited testing programs inside carefully selected parts of the Gobi Desert. Elion Resources Group worked closely with regional environmental offices and land restoration teams during the early stages. Researchers monitored rabbit behavior, vegetation growth, and soil changes across several controlled areas. At first, the results looked promising. Small plants started appearing in places where bare sand had dominated for years. Some test zones showed better moisture retention beneath the surface. Wind movement slowed slightly in a few restored regions because vegetation started spreading more naturally between planted trees. Those early reports created excitement. Chinese media described the project as a creative environmental breakthrough. Some newspapers called it one of the most unusual restoration experiments in modern China. International environmental groups also began watching the Gobi Desert more closely after the United Nations praised earlier restoration efforts connected to Wang Wenbiao and Elion Resources Group. The rabbit project soon expanded far beyond small test zones. Teams built large breeding areas near restoration sites. Trucks carried animals deep into isolated desert regions. Workers created monitoring stations to study movement patterns and survival rates. Environmental engineers mapped release areas across large sections of Inner Mongolia. By 2015, millions of rabbits had entered different parts of the restoration network. Many scientists believed the project could become another major success story for China's environmental programs. Some experts even suggested that other countries facing desertification might copy similar ideas in the future. For a short time, hope spread almost as quickly as the rabbits themselves. Then, workers inside several monitoring stations started noticing unusual patterns in the desert sand. Millions set free. In 2015, the Rabbit Project entered its biggest stage. Environmental teams moved thousands of cages into remote parts of the Gobi Desert. Large trucks crossed rough desert roads day and night, workers unloaded animals into carefully marked release zones spread across Inner Mongolia. Some areas sat near restored tree belts built by Alien Resources Group. Other locations surrounded by dry land where almost nothing had grown for years. The scale of the operation surprised even experienced researchers. Government crews, local workers, and environmental teams worked together across huge stretches of desert. Monitoring stations tracked rabbit movement through cameras, sensors, and field reports. Scientists watched the first release groups closely because nobody had ever attempted a project like this on such a large scale before. When the cages opened, thousands of rabbits rushed into the sand almost immediately. They spread across dunes, dry valleys, and newly restored vegetation zones. At first, everything looked normal. Many rabbits settled near planted willow regions where small plants had already started returning. Some animals dug tunnels beneath loose ground, while others moved deeper into open desert regions. Chinese media quickly focused on the project. Several newspapers praised the operation as another example of China fighting environmental collapse through innovation. Television reports showed green patches slowly spreading across dry land. Drone footage captured long tree belts cutting across yellow dunes inside the Gobi Desert. International environmental groups also followed the experiment because the United Nations had already recognized earlier restoration work connected to Wang Wenbiao and Alien Resources Group. Then, early field reports started creating excitement. Some monitoring teams noticed better plant growth near active rabbit zones. Small shrubs appeared more often around loose soil, where animals had dug tunnels. In several regions, winds carried less surface sand because roots held the ground together more effectively. A few environmental experts even suggested the rabbit program might help speed up desert recovery beyond original expectations. For a short time, the project looked successful. More release groups entered the desert during the following months. Workers expanded monitoring stations deeper into Inner Mongolia, while researchers collected new soil data from restored areas. Several environmental planners started discussing whether similar projects could work in other dry regions across northern China. But then, small warning signs began appearing. Field workers noticed that rabbit groups moved faster than expected between restoration zones. Some breeding areas expanded much earlier than scientists predicted. Young plants disappeared from several monitored regions within surprisingly short periods of time. In a few locations, animals stripped vegetation faster than new growth could replace it. Then another strange pattern appeared. Predators started entering restored regions more often. Foxes, hawks, and wild dogs followed growing rabbit populations into areas where they rarely appeared before. Monitoring stations reported unusual movement across several desert sectors during nighttime hours. At first, researchers believed these problems remained temporary. But inside a growing number of monitoring reports, one detail kept appearing again and again. The rabbit population was increasing much faster than the original models predicted. Population explosion. In late 2016, researchers inside the Gobi Desert realized the situation was changing very quickly. Rabbits were no longer staying inside controlled regions. Large groups started spreading far beyond the original restoration zones built by Alien Resources Group. Monitoring stations across Inner Mongolia reported sudden population jumps within only a few months. The breeding speed shocked many environmental teams. One female rabbit could produce several groups of babies every year. Those young rabbits matured quickly and started reproducing again almost immediately. Scientists had expected population growth, but they never predicted numbers rising this fast across such huge areas. Soon, small rabbit groups became massive moving colonies. Workers described entire sections of desert appearing alive at night. thousands of animals crossed dunes together, searching for vegetation. In some restored regions, rabbits consumed fresh plant growth faster than new plants could recover. Young roots disappeared beneath the surface before trees and shrubs fully developed. That created a dangerous chain reaction. Without stable roots, the loose soil started breaking apart again. Wind pushed exposed sand across recovering areas that had remained stable for years. Some newly restored vegetation zones began collapsing under constant feeding pressure. Environmental workers who once celebrated the rabbit project now struggled to protect young plants from the same animals released to help the land recover. But the damage spread farther every month. In several areas near farming communities, rabbits moved beyond restoration sites and entered agricultural land. Farmers reported damaged crops and disappearing vegetation along field edges. Local workers tried building fences around sensitive regions, but rabbits dug beneath many barriers or moved around them during nighttime hours. Then confusion spread inside the project itself. Some scientists believed natural predators would eventually control the growing populations. Others demanded emergency action before the situation became worse. Government officials held meetings with environmental planners, land restoration experts, and regional authorities across Inner Mongolia. But no solution worked fast enough. Teams attempted population control in several monitored sectors during 2017, yet rabbit numbers continued rising. Some areas recorded breeding activity almost year-round because restored vegetation provided a steady food supply in parts of the desert. At the same time, predators started following the growing populations deeper into restored regions. Foxes appeared more often near monitoring stations. Hawks circled above active breeding zones for hours. Wild dogs moved into areas where researchers rarely saw them before the rabbit expansion began. But even that natural response wasn't enough to stop what was already unfolding. Because underneath all of this visible chaos, the desert ecosystem itself was starting to shift in ways no one had fully understood yet. When nature struck back, environmental teams initially believed the problem could still be controlled. They thought stronger monitoring systems, better barriers, and tighter management might slow everything down before real damage spread again. But during 2017 and 2018, something far more serious began to appear. It wasn't just about plants being eaten or soil being disturbed anymore. People living near the desert edges started reporting attacks on chickens, goats, and small livestock. Something inside the ecosystem was shifting. Nature was reorganizing itself around the exploding rabbit population. And that was only the beginning, because beneath the surface, another problem was growing silently. Millions of rabbits were digging thousands of tunnels across loose desert ground. At first, this even helped in some areas, allowing water to sink deeper into the soil. But once the population exploded, the same digging started causing instability instead. Tunnel networks spread under vegetation, and the soil that once looked recovered began losing its structure again. Then the winds returned. Strong desert storms swept across these weakened regions, pushing sand back over restored land. Willow belts planted by Elian Resources Group still survived in some areas, but many smaller plants were buried again under fresh layers of dust. And just a few years after recovery, some zones started looking damaged once more. But the problems weren't only happening on the surface. Inside overcrowded rabbit colonies, something else appeared. Disease, weak animals, strange behavior, sudden population drops in tightly packed zones. Monitoring teams grew concerned, because now millions of rabbits were connected across vast restoration regions. If infections spread, there would be no easy way to contain them. And that fear slowly became reality. Because the issue was no longer local anymore, it was spreading across the entire ecosystem. So authorities stepped in with emergency measures across Inner Mongolia. New barriers were built. Rabbits were removed from heavily damaged zones, and wildlife movement was tracked more closely than ever before. But nothing stayed stable for long, because every solution created a new problem somewhere else. Remove too many rabbits, and predators that had started depending on them begin to struggle. Leave them alone, and vegetation destruction continues spreading. It became a no-win situation. By 2019, criticism around the project grew louder. Some experts said humans had intervened too aggressively in a system they still didn't fully understand. Others argued the problem wasn't the idea itself, but the lack of long-term control. But one truth became impossible to ignore. What started as a hopeful restoration project had turned into a warning about how quickly nature can become unpredictable when a single balance is pushed too far. A global warning. For many years, people around the world viewed deserts as dead places where almost nothing could survive. Governments focused on stopping the spread of sand because millions of lives depended on healthy land, clean water, and stable farming regions. China's restoration work inside the Gobi Desert showed that humans could fight environmental collapse with enough money, planning, and determination. But the Rabbit Project revealed something else at the same time. Nature does not always follow human plans. What looked like a smart environmental solution slowly created new problems that scientists never fully expected during the early stages of the experiment. The project began with good intentions. Workers wanted to rebuild damaged land and protect communities from expanding deserts. Yet once the balance inside the ecosystem changed, controlling the results became far more difficult than anyone imagined. Environmental experts in other countries paid close attention to what happened in Inner Mongolia after 2017. Researchers studying invasive species compared the rabbit expansion to older ecological disasters in Australia and other regions where animal populations grew beyond human control. Several international groups discussed the risks of introducing fast-breeding species into fragile ecosystems, even when restoration goals appeared positive at first. The story also changed how many scientists discussed desert recovery projects around the world. Before the Gobi experiment, many large environmental programs focused mostly on speed. Governments wanted faster growth, faster recovery, and faster protection against climate damage. But the Rabbit Project showed that ecosystems need balance more than speed. A solution that helps one part of nature can damage another part unexpectedly if humans fail to understand every connection inside the environment. That lesson reached far beyond China. Climate experts from the United Nations Environment Program later continued using the Gobi Desert as an important example of both environmental success and environmental risk. The region still demonstrated how tree planting, solar projects, and land restoration could slow desertification. At the same time, the rabbit population crisis reminded governments that nature changes in ways humans cannot always predict or control completely. Even today, many restored regions inside the Gobi Desert still show signs of recovery from years of environmental pressure. Large willow belts continue blocking moving sand across parts of Inner Mongolia. Solar panels still stand across huge sections of dry land. Some green zones remain stable because workers spent decades protecting them, but the rabbit experiment left behind an important warning that scientists still discuss today. Humans often believe they can control nature with enough technology, enough planning, and enough confidence. Yet ecosystems follow their own rules beneath the surface. One small change can trigger another, then another, then another. And sometimes, the biggest environmental dangers begin with ideas that once looked like miracles. So, here we are. China tried to stop the growing desert and protect millions of lives. At first, the Rabbit Project looked like a perfect solution. But over time, nature showed a different side of the story. because even a small imbalance in an ecosystem can lead to unexpected consequences. So, do you think China made the right choice by releasing millions of rabbits into the desert? Or should humans avoid interfering with nature completely? Drop your opinion in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, like the video and subscribe for more. We'll see you in the next video.